Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Sarah Gordon. I'm the Director of Student Activities here at Mayanode. I also teach Gemara, Israel Advocacy. It's really nice to see so many people coming, especially sometimes post-Slichot, to come learn together. And I'm really excited to kind of look at the topic of Shlomo today and discuss it as a group. So it's officially the title I gave the shiur was When Good Kings Go Bad, the Cautionary Tale of Shlomo HaMelech. In general, I think that Shlomo is it's a fascinating character. It's a fascinating kind of time in Jewish history. On one hand, we have tremendous successes. On the other hand, tremendous failures. Highs of Jewish history and lows of Jewish history all kind of wrapped together. And I think especially when we think about the time period that we're currently in Elul, when we're trying to be reflective about ourselves, about our lives, thinking a little bit about sin and kind of what causes us to do certain things, I think looking at Shlomo as a paradigm or as a model can be very helpful. Once we, kind of look at this bigadol to figure out, what leads to sin, what leads to kind of these failures or successes. Is it all or is it nothing? How can we kind of take lessons from Shlomo and see if we can see these in our own lives as well? So I thought we'd have a chance to do that and kind of explore that topic today. But before we start, I want to just kind of throw out kind of an open question. When you think of Shlomo, King Solomon, a lot of us might have learned these stories when we were younger or seen it in different time periods of our lives. What comes to mind? When you think of Shlomo, what is kind of the first thing that comes to mind in your head? Rich. Okay, so we have wealth. Anything else? What else? Just think just look around the room. What comes to mind? The wives. Okay, so we have riches. We have wives. Anything else? Beit HaMikdash. Okay, good. So riches, wives, Beit HaMikdash. Right, we're seeing the contrast a little bit here. Anything else come to mind when we think of Shlomo? Power. Great. Take maybe one more. Smart. Okay, good. And what's interesting, I think, is already we kind of see, kind of a conflict here. On one hand, we think of, the riches, the wives, the power. At the same time, we have him as, one of our wisest melachim, one of our wisest kings. He's someone who built the Beit HaMikdash, that considered, one of the high points in Jewish history, in our religious growth as a nation, but also someone who seems to have, been very flawed at the same time, that leads to kind of these failures, ultimately of his reign. So how do we kind of balance these two sides of Shlomo, these two kind of pictures that we have in our head? So that's kind of what we're going to try to do today, and try to explore that a little bit together. So the first thing I thought that would be helpful in doing this is to kind of look at a general chart of basically what happens in these stories in Sefer Melachim of Shlomo. We'll have a little bit of a discussion about this, and we'll look a little bit more at these stories point by point. So first of all, many of these ideas are not my own. There's a really excellent book by Rav Alex Israel, who's a scholar in Israel, called Book of Kings, Torn in Two. It's an excellent book, highly recommend it. It's good Yom Tov reading if looking for something to read. And a few different articles as well. I give you at the back kind of a further reading if you're interested in looking at different articles on this. So many of these ideas come from those ideas. So this chart over here, we'll actually play around here a little bit with the smartboard. It's a chart you have on the first page. This is adapted a little bit from a chart that Rav Alex has in his book that goes through a little bit the basic kind of ideas of what happens in Siporei Shlomo. So I want to go through this very quickly, and then together we're going to see if we can kind of pinpoint exactly when we think things start kind of derailing or kind of going downhill. So at the beginning, we're starting off in Sefer Melachim, in Perek Gimel. We're told Shlomo marries Bat Paro. God appears to Shlomo at Gibon, and he asks for wisdom, right? Also kind of a very famous scene. Then the famous story of the two zonot, right, who come. We don't know whose baby the baby is. And Shlomo has his first kind of act of wisdom. Moving on, he gets a cabinet, reorganizes the nation a little bit. In Perek Hey, we're told about Shlomo's power, his wealth, his wisdom, international relations. He creates, we know before, right, he marries Bat Paro, so we have a relationship with Egypt. Here, he creates a relationship with Phoenicia, with Hiram Melech Tzor. He creates a business arrangement that's going to be very helpful later on with constructing the Beit HaMikdash. And already we see that Shlomo kind of puts together a kind of forced labor and also general taxation to pay for a lot of the building projects that he's putting together. Moving on, we then have the Beit HaMikdash and a lot of building projects going on. we built the Beit HaMikdash, we built Shlomo's palace, then we come back to the Kalim of the Beit HaMikdash. Everything is magnified from the time period of the Mishkan. Instead of having, in times when we had kind of one of the Kalim, for example, like one of the menorot, or one menorah, now we're going to have 10. Everything's kind of magnified with Shlomo. Everything's going to be huge. Then we have the dedication of the Beit HaMikdash and a very kind of powerful religious ceremony where Shlomo has a tefillah in front of the entire people, pledging, allegiance to Hashem and what the Beit HaMikdash is supposed to stand for. Then God appears to him again, moving forward in Perek Tet. This is a little bit more of a warning kind of from God that, you have to be listening to what God says if he wants continued peace and prosperity. Then we have again power, wealth, and wisdom. A few things change. Now wisdom, we're going to look at these psukim together. Now for wisdom, when people come to hear about Shlomo's wisdom, they're also kind of bringing kind of tributes, almost not exactly an entrance fee, but they're bringing money with them also. A little bit more forced labor and taxation. We'll see a lot about that. Another kind of connection with Hiram, but as over here we had, it was more setting up a business deal. Now with Hiram, in the Psukim, it talks about how Hiram's not so happy with the business deal. He feels he's not getting enough money. There has to be a kind of a renegotiation of the contract. And then we have a very famous story, right? The visit of Malkat Shva, Queen of Sheba comes, and she's very impressed with everything she sees. And then we have kind of the official sins that are listed in Perek Yud Aleph: multiple wives, Avodah Zarah, God rebuked Shlomo. There's a lot of enemies approach, both internal and external, whether it's from other countries, from Aram or Yerovam, who's kind of a more internal rebellion that seems to be starting. Shlomo dies, and as we know, after his death, the kingdom is split. Sefer Melachim a little bit in a nutshell. But as we can see from this, a lot of positives, a lot of negatives. And I want to kind of ask the group over here, once you look at this chart, when do you think the decline begins? Is there a place we can kind of pinpoint? Because I think before we can ask the question of why and what leads to sin, the question is when does this start? Is there kind of a line that we can draw here about when kind of the kingdom starts to go off the rails a little bit? Yes.
It almost seems like the whole process of achieving the Beit HaMikdash was the high point. But then actually when that was finished and then it's moving on to business as usual, that's where things started to come undone slowly, but definitely.
Okay, interesting. So you're kind of saying we're like around here? Okay, so kind of like after the Beit HaMikdash is kind of like the high point, right? And after that, things kind of start to fall apart. So one option could be over here. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
When too many wives, he started to idol-shipping and going with the way of the wives or the wives.
Okay, so the more kind of direct sins here, like in Perek Yud Aleph, definitely very clear, right? We have wives that are coming, and we'll see kind of, we're going to do this actually in a minute, but we'll see a lot of parallels between Perek Gimel and Perek Yud Aleph, also known as our next chart, which we'll get to in a second, where we see basically, everything that seems to be very good in Perek Gimel seems to get undone in Perek Yud Aleph. But we'll see, is there kind of an earlier stage as well? But other thoughts? Yeah.
Maybe this is really not what people think, but if he's marrying somebody from Egypt, I don't know about that because the Chumash says,
So you're saying, interesting, so you're saying almost maybe at the very beginning that, great, and this is kind of what I want to see, like these different thoughts. So on one hand, is it kind of the start, very clear to Chumash when it starts listing the list of sins that Shlomo does? Is it perhaps a little bit earlier, right, as people said, that maybe, after the Beit HaMikdash, we see kind of things start to fall apart, and just to kind of add on to what, I'm sorry, Rami, your name?
Oprah.
As overshared over here, that we see over here, there's also, we'll see different scholars that say this as well, that we see that, switch colors, that over here we have Hashem, appearing to Shlomo and Gimel, and over here we have Hashem appearing to Shlomo again, kind of almost as brackets, and just like over here we had Shlomo's power, his wealth, his wisdom, international relations, forced labor, we have all of these again over here, but it's more kind of things are breaking apart. So it also seems in the text, you could maybe argue this is an example also. So we have kind of one option, two options, and then a third option, interesting enough, which we'll explore as well, is maybe there isn't a breaking point. Maybe from the very beginning, there already were kind of these seeds, of things that were going to fall apart, and Shlomo's already kind of in his opening moves making mistakes that are almost dooming his kingdom. We'll have a chance to see, which one of these can kind of play out. I saw more hands, yeah.
The thing we didn't mention yet was his forcing people to be taxed and do labor, and he's really not listening to the people anymore,
Yeah.
which is the beginning of failing, because he's a leader of the people, and he's not connected to them. He's only listening to his accumulations.
For sure, and I think that one thing that we're going to see here is the role of wealth and power and what that can do sometimes to a king, and as well, especially when we start looking at the psukim at the end, why does Shlomo's kind of kingdom fall apart? So you can give the practical reason and then the theological or religious reason.
And wealth and power are a test.
Right. And these reasons themselves don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? Is it that the kingdom falls apart because Shlomo has all his wives and the Avodah Zarah, and God says He's going to take it away? Or is it almost a rebellion of the people that the Beit HaMikdash is being built on their backs, right? They're being taxed constantly and enforced labor, and they've had enough. Or both of these, showing really examples of the same kind of sins or the same kind of power moves that are being made by Shlomo. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Too many horses. Hashem specifically told him, don't go
Yeah.
to Egypt to get horses.
For sure. And we'll have a chance to see that source as well, right? That how Shlomo really seems to be ignoring all the exhortations that we have that a king is supposed to follow. So excellent as well, yeah.
And if you look throughout history, you see it all. Whenever there's too much power and too much wealth, there's always a pinnacle on top, and it always goes down. It's almost never, you look through all the great societies, the great monarchies and everything, and you always see a decline.
For sure. No, great. So I think what we've seen so far is, it's very unclear. And I think that sometimes we look at the story of Shlomo and we think that, it seems to be set up, at least sometimes in Tanakh, as a very straight, going up a hill, something happened, and everything comes crashing down. But I think what we're seeing already is much more nuanced. When exactly are these sins happening? Where are the kind of seeds being sown, and can we trace it and get a more nuanced look? And again, tying it back to Elul, especially in our own lives, when we think about reflect about our own actions, sin doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's usually kind of a buildup of behavior, of repeating behavior that creates something or creates or finally starts to break out. So I think we'll see that here a little bit as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a chance to kind of go through a few of these key events in Shlomo's life and discuss as a group, especially some of the ones I think that growing up we might have always seen as positive. And don't worry, we're not going to totally bash Shlomo. We'll have a chance to see both sides and just open it up and see, as we go through these different events, are they really as clearly positive or negative perhaps than we might have thought in the past. If you look at the second page, there's a second chart that I wanted to show you. I don't have all of this in the smartboard, but we can look at this as well. So Dr. Michael Goodman is a scholar in Israel. He works in the Infront Institute. He has a very interesting book on Sefer Dvarim that in it he writes a little bit about Shlomo HaMelech. So he actually points out that there really is, kind of going back to one of the approaches we just saw, a very stark difference between Perek Gimel and Perek Yud Aleph that is clearly kind of set out in a textual way, almost to show us these kind of, it seems almost that things were very, very good, then all of a sudden things come crashing down. And he shows us again with the text, there's a very clear kind of differentiation that we see on one hand, Perek Gimel, we're told, Vayahav Shlomo et Hashem l'lechat bechuchot David Aviv, that Shlomo loves God. And then immediately we're told in Perek Yud, not immediately, but much later on, in Perek Yud Aleph, we're told, and now who does Shlomo love? Now he loves, right, the Nashim Rabot, right, the Nashim Nachriot Rabot, right, the Et Bat Paro. Bat Paro makes an appearance over here also in Perek Gimel, right, going back to, as we mentioned before, perhaps this is where it starts, like Shlomo marries Bat Paro, but at this point, he loves God. But later on, that same language, by the time we get to Perek Yud Aleph, is already now being used to show that now his love is not reserved for God, but really for his many wives. And as before he was following the ways of David Aviv, David his father, now we see that he is specifically told that he's not loyal, right? That he is not going, he's doing Vayas Shlomo hara b'nei Hashem, v'lo b'nei acharei Hashem b'David David Aviv. And if we look at the next kind of part also, the second kind of parallel that we see is in the first thing in Perek Gimel, we know that at this point the Beit HaMikdash is not built, and people are worshiping on Bamot. So as Bamot, for those of us that are familiar, were kind of like a breakaway places to serve, to worship, but really specifically to serve God. They were not used for Avodah Zarah, and they were allowed at least up until the time of the Beit HaMikdash. So at this point, people are, since that Shlomo does not get rid of the Bamot, but at least people are worshiping God. However, by the time we get to Perek Yud, now we have Shlomo, the same kind of shorish which is being used, but now Shlomo is building bamot, not to God, but bamot to Avodah Zarah, to the different gods of his different multiple wives. So again, we kind of see the way the text is setting up, at least on one hand, is almost like this kind of mountain, right? That things are going well, then all of a sudden things come crashing down. But as we saw earlier, that's not so clear. So now as we have a chance to go through these different events, we'll see exactly how that plays out. Just to show you one more thing before we do that, really as people mentioned before about the horses, source number 3 is just Parshat HaMelech, which is basically the exhortations that a king is told that he must follow. To not have too many wives, not too many horses, not have too many riches. And it's interesting because I think that Parshat HaMelech kind of reads as almost like a bucket list, right, of Shlomo's sins, right? Also, kind of making it a little bit like this is exactly what we're told, what we're not supposed to do, but here we see Shlomo coming and doing all these sins again. So again, our question is, does this come in vacuum? Is it really so clear? In more kind of like academic circles, or there are even biblical critics who say that maybe these are different stories. It's just too stark of a difference. Like, how could it be that things were so great and things were so bad? I think we'll see a few kind of options, but really, perhaps these seeds were there all along. That's what we're going to have a chance to see. So we'll actually keep our chart on the board over here as we go through step by step. So the first thing we're going to talk about, source number 4, is the very first thing that happens, Shlomo's marriage to Bat Paro. So already we heard one kind of opinion against it. Any thoughts? Shlomo's marriage to Bat Paro, the first thing he does in Perek Gimel, good, bad, neutral. Thoughts on that? Yeah.
I think it's complicated because it's what kings needed to do to have the power a king needs to have. It was just one of those given basic things you do. And so in the Jewish religion you don't do it, but then how are you going to be a king competing with other kings of other nations if you don't do it?
For sure. Something that I think I've thought a lot about also here, it really seems that, political marriages is what was done, right? If you wanted to create a strong alliance, if you wanted to protect your country, it's what you had to do. I spent some time this summer, I was in Scotland. I was reading up a little bit about Scottish history, very, very bloody, very violent, but a lot of it sounds a little bit like Sefer Melachim, where how do they make alliances? Okay, this son is going to marry the daughter of this person in France and try to, prevent a war. We're going to marry this person from England and try to prevent a war. That's basically what you had to do. I think also what you're alluding to, which is an important point, is a lot of times I think, what we see, another king, right, who did this, who had another kind of controversial political marriage was who? In Tanakh, at least. Achav, right? We know Achav marries Izebel, who is seen as a much more negative character, I think, in Tanakh. But again, I don't know, personally I have a little bit more of a charitable read kind of Achav, basically about what you're saying. On one hand, kings are trying to do, we're told to do hishtadlut, right, to take initiative. And we're supposed to protect our countries. And this is how you protected your country, by having a strong international relationship with superpowers. How are you going to create a strong relationship with Egypt? At the same time, we're also told to have bitachon and to rely solely on God. I think that's a little bit later on in Tanakh. A lot of the conflicts between the kings and the Nevi'im hinge around this debate. So I think, right, it's on one hand we can see how it's negative. At the same time, it's understandable. Shlomo's trying to protect his kingdom, and this is the best way that he sees to do it. Yeah.
His father didn't do it, and he was successful. He didn't marry other wives from other countries.
True. Well, David, actually, I think David David has other issues, I guess, if people that he's married or not married. But here also, right, it's not every king that does it. That's true. Right, so maybe it's a little bit harder to kind of read it. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I just have another thought. Maybe it's the language. Maybe it's the idea that, okay, maybe you're marrying for political reasons to protect your borders, but you don't have to love her. And if you end up loving her, then you end up worshiping her gods. It's like, where do you draw that line that it's a political marriage as opposed to a marriage that takes you to the wrong place religiously? I don't know, but
right.
It seems.
No, and I think that leaves it kind of, we see how it's a difficult choice here and how things aren't so clear, right, with Shlomo. I think the question with Bat Paro is, we can understand why he does it, but does she change the focus? And I think that's something important to think about also as we go through with Shlomo. A lot of things that he does are understandable, they're laudable, they're what good kings do to protect their people, but is it slowly kind of chipping away? There's always a danger, right? It's, with assimilation or different ideas like that, is it slowly kind of chipping away on things that are happening? I saw a hand, yeah.
It also shows us that if we put ourselves in certain places, we could be influenced.
For sure.
And even if he was so starkly enmeshed in Yiddishkeit, marrying and being intimate with people who worship other gods, he was led that way. It's very hard to resist. He's human.
Right? No, definitely. So I want to just keep moving, but we'll definitely kind of come back to this. One more source to show you in source number 5. So the Gemara in Masachet Shabbat brings this up as well. It talks about how B'sha'ah shenasa Shlomo et bat Paro yerad Gavriel v'na'atz kaneh bayam ve'alav shirton ve'alav nivnei keren gadol shel romi. And the Gemara in Shabbat tells us that, almost like this, midrashic take on what was happening. At the time that Shlomo married Bat Paro, an angel came down from Shemayim, stuck a stick kind of in the ground, and from there, the Roman Empire was created. So again, I think here, kind of like Chazal looking backwards and seeing, was this kind of, the beginning of the end? Like, did this kind of change the focus, even leading ultimately to, Rome, which is not even the first Beit HaMikdash, even the second, coming to destroy it. But is this almost like, can we trace everything back, or this idea of Korban, perhaps to this first move? Something to think about as well. So already we saw about Paro, could be good, could be bad, understandable, but already kind of some seeds that are being built in. So let's move on. The next thing I want to talk about was Shlomo's request for wisdom. Which is basically source number 6. We see that, the famous story, Shlomo, God's like, choose whatever you want to wish for, I'll give you. Shlomo asks for wisdom, and Hashem is so impressed that he asks for wisdom, and he doesn't ask for riches or for power. Then what does God say?
Of course.
I will give you, now you'll get everything, right? Now you'll get everything. Thoughts on that? Request for wisdom, good, bad, neutral?
Good.
Good? What? So why? Or why not? Why not?
Yeah, how could it not
Right.
be good?
So, all right, on one hand, right, maybe wisdom, right, what can be bad? A king asking for wisdom. Anyone want to kind of argue the other side? This was the one that, when I was first kind of looking into it, I was a little surprised. I thought, oh, wisdom for sure, right, in the checkbox. But why might this also be something a little bit more, perhaps, I don't know, can we poke some holes in it? Yeah.
I'm thinking, if a person thinks he's so wise, sometimes he becomes above everybody else. And soon Hashem, he could think that he's wiser and could do things that even though he knows in his head really, but he's so wise that he really can go above things.
Like good, right? Is there almost like a sense of hubris that comes along with requesting wisdom? Right, like, and what would that lead to? Kind of like this breaking down of boundaries, which we'll see as well. So it's interesting, a few kind of thoughts about that. One, I think that we see the request for wisdom as something positive. In general, we know the focus of a king is to be someone who is, practicing tzedek and mishpat, someone who's a judge, who's a shofet. And the story that happens right after this to show kind of Shlomo's, wisdom is the story of the 2 zonot, right? The 2 zonot who come, we don't know who's we don't know which one of them is the real mother of the baby, and Shlomo is able to kind of solve the problem. What's interesting, however, is there's perhaps a different way to kind of read that story. First of all, one idea for wisdom, it's very good to be, asking for wisdom. Rabbi Chaim Angel, who's also a Bible scholar at YU, talks about how the whole story of the zonot is actually just to show that even a zonah, even a prostitute who's on the kind of lowest level of society, can get her day in court and her kind of moment of justice in Shlomo's kingdom, which is something that's very positive. At the same time, if you think about it, it's good that Shlomo's asking for wisdom, but perhaps, is there something else that he should have asked for? Is wisdom really the best possible he could ask for? Maybe he should be asking for Yirat Shamayim. Perhaps that's something we would see more as appropriate from a religious leader. If you look at the text, also the idea of Shlomo is asking, right? He wants to be a judge, but he's saying Lahavin bein tov lara. Does that sound familiar to any of us? What is it when we think of Lahavin bein tov? Yeah, right. It sounds like Gan Eden, and which part in Gan Eden, right? This is the right. Well, we're not the Eitzadah. Well, we're not supposed to really be asking for almost something that's a little bit off limits. And if you look at source 7, the Midrash in Shir HaShirim kind of, it's interesting, puts it in almost like a negative light, and it uses this analogy. Amar Lev. I'll just summarize, I guess, from the beginning. We got some time. But the idea that there was an orphan who grows up in the palace of the king. Amar le hamelach she'al ma italach, like, ask me whatever you want, right? And the kid starts to think, and he says, im sho'el ani kesef ezahav hu noten li. If I ask him for gold and for silver, he'll give it to me. Avanim tovot v'margalilot hu noten li. If I ask him for jewels, he'll give them to me. Amar hareini sho'el bito shel hamelach v'hakol bichlal. So what should I do? I'll ask for the daughter of the king, then I'll get everything. I remember like my nieces are very into like Disney movies now and having a whole discussion with them, like with Aladdin, asking for their wishes, and they're like, why doesn't he ask for more wishes? Like that's what you're supposed to do in the first wish, right? So it seems like here also, that's what's happening, right? This whole idea of, Shlomo almost as, well, first of all, it's in the Nimshal, it's seeing Shlomo as seeing himself perhaps as the son-in-law of Hashem, right? It's also a little bit of, perhaps overstepping boundaries, as we see. But the same idea right at the end, the Nimshal, Shlomo is saying, if I ask for all these things, I'll get them. If I ask for Chokhmah, everything will be within my reach. So maybe it's not as, and again, I don't want to take away. It could be this is a very positive moment. I think Shlomo does have his very positive moments, right, in his life. But we could look at this also perhaps as, is this already crossing boundaries, a little bit of hubris that's going on?
But Hashem didn't see it that way, or he wouldn't have offered him everything
True.
with it. So Hashem is the final judge.
Right, no,
No,
definitely
what's
also,
good, what's
right, and so I think there's definitely kind of like, I think overall it is positive, but is there a way, especially with the Midrash, I was also very fascinated to see if the Midrash kind of picks up on this. The final thing that I'll point out when it comes to, when it comes to this idea of wisdom is another kind of way to look at the story of the two Zonot. And Dr. Yoav Barzilai is a Tanakh scholar in Israel, so he published an article in Megadim, which is a Tanakh journal of Yeshivat Har Etzion, and he talks a little bit about looking at this story in a different way. On one end, we think, it's amazing, like even the Zonot get, justice. So the way he spins it, though, is could you take a step back? Imagine you're like in the courts, with, watching all this happen, and Shlomo is the judge, and he's like, how are we going to solve this problem? The baby, bring me a sword. And he's standing there with a sword, about to cut the baby in half. Everyone's, shocked, and then at the end, the mother's like, no, it's really, she's the mother, it's not, or, I'm the mother, or passing the baby off, and we'll figure it out. And everything, that moment with the sword is kind of passed over. Now imagine you're kind of next in line to be judged. They're like, all right, next person, come up. I feel like, I don't know, I might be a little bit nervous, what is Shlomo going to do? And he actually parallels it. There's a lot of textual parallels between that story and Akedat Yitzchak. I thought was very, very fascinating. I showed you some of them in source number 9. With a lot of parallel words, whether it's getting up in the morning, having two people together, right? Instead of Avraham and Yitzchak, we have the two Zonot, but Yom HaShlishi, the Milah Mancha, the word that keeps coming up over and over again is Beno or Beni. And just thematically, you have in these two kind of stories this idea of a child is saved from death, right, at the last minute by command from a higher power. Killing the child is a test of the parents' self-sacrifice. And at the end, you have a happy ending in both, and the child is returned to the parents. But Dr. Barzilai kind of uses this as a way to see that this story, is this really a story that's showing, the positive aspects of Shlomo's chokhmah? Or is this perhaps, again, showing almost, Shlomo taking this power and going a little bit too far? And how exactly he's acting. That, here seeing himself, as God's the one who commands the story of Akedat Yitzchak, but now we see that Shlomo is also sees himself as someone who can create these tests, to kind of test parents and children and put children's lives in danger. So I thought this was fascinating. I never thought of this before. Just another way to kind of look at the story. Let's pull this up as our chart is disappearing from the smartboard. Okay, so, and again, he ties this into source number 8, that when everyone hears what Shlomo is doing, it says, Vayiru Mifnei HaMelech, they're in awe of the king. So the question is, are they in awe, right, in a positive way, or is there a little bit of fear also of almost like, what is this king going to do next, right? He almost killed a baby in front of us, and where exactly is this going to go? And later on we see in sources 10 and 11 that people come from all over the world to hear Shlomo's wisdom, which I think, again, is something that's very, very positive, right? We're told about his wisdom in Parakeh. Especially for our goal as a Jewish people to be an Or Lagoyim, to create a state where people come and they want to visit and learn about God, you need to have a leader who is someone respectable that people want to come here, right? But at the same time, by the time we get down to Parak Yud, which is source 11, when people are coming now to hear their wisdom, we're told, when people are coming, they're coming to, hear Shlomo's wisdom, but they're also bringing gifts. And it could be they're bringing them because, out of the goodness of their heart, they want to bring a tribute. But as I was reading through different books, and in Rabbi Alex's book as well, he points out that it's almost like an entrance fee. Like, what's Shlomo using his wisdom for? We don't hear about any other judging after the story of the Zonot. We just hear about people coming and bringing money. So again, kind of like, how is this wisdom being used? Again, I think, I don't want to take away from, I think, very positive aspects of Shlomo, but I think we do see that, things could be, already these seeds could be there as well. So that again is wisdom. So moving on, a couple more ones to do in the time that we have. Let's talk about building projects. So if you look at source 12, we see kind of some of the big building projects Shlomo does. Obviously building the Beit HaMikdash, but also building his palace. So I'll read one pasuk or a couple pasukim together, and then I'm curious to hear what people think here. Building projects good, building projects bad. So we are told in source number 12, בשנה אחת, 11 בירח בול, הוא חודש השמיני, כלה בית לכל דבריו ולכל משפטיו, ויבנהו 7 שנים. Beit HaMikdash is finished, takes 7 years to build it. Ve'et beito, and Shlomo's palace, bana Shlomo 13 shana, ve'echal et kol beito. And Shlomo's palace takes 13 years, but it's done second. Thoughts on that? Building projects, we know that also the Beit HaMikdash was huge, right? I gave you pictures, I think a picture at the end, right, of like famous kind of picture of the drawing of the second temple of Shlomo, B'tzifarta. You see kind of like the huge yam, and just like the, you know, like the magnitude of the bayit and the Beit HaMikdash. Thoughts about building projects? Good, bad? Yeah.
I think by juxtaposing the time that it took to build the Beit HaMikdash versus the palace, definitely there's a negative
Almost
connotation
double.
there, almost twice as long.
Okay, good, right? So definitely some kind of critique, right? Just opposing the times it took to build it. So it's interesting. Ramban talks about this, that the Mefarshim are kind of split on trying a little bit to defend it. But I agree with you. I think the juxtaposition seems like a critique. So they'll say that, you know, oh, even though you know the Beit HaMikdash was finished first. They say Beit HaMikdash took less time because Shlomo cared about it more. So he was like, you know, very fast about building it. But like his palace, he was like, like construction can just take longer. So that's kind of like one way to defend it. But at the same time, I think that from the Pshat, we really do see, right, I think it's specifically written to show us, like, wait a second, you know, how long is each one taking? And even if you look at source 13, just the dimensions, right, you see like the dimensions of the temple versus, let's say, the Beit Yar Levanon, which is another building that Shlomo built kind of for his own, kind of like just for beautifying up Yerushalayim. And again, just seeing kind of like even though the Beit HaMikdash itself was huge, seeing that kind of difference. Other thoughts on building projects? Yeah.
And probably he built the houses for his wife individually.
Right. And we'll see specifically when he builds them below for Bad Paro, that causes also a lot of problems later on.
And there are pasukim and pasukim on all the stuff he put in his palace. I mean, it was nauseating.
Right. So it's interesting. So on one hand, right?
Total gosh.
Right. So, but on one hand, I think this is the question, because going back to our original question about the marriage to Bad Paro, right? If you're trying to create a state that people will come to, and it's going to be like an Or LaGoyim, it has to look nice, right? It has to be like a nice building, right? You have to like clean things up. It has to be respectable. But at the same time, there has to be substance, and there's always that question of, is it going too far? Is this being done in excess, right? Which I think is the question here. But one of the Beit HaMikdash is beautiful, stunning building. Instead of having anytime there was like one of the kalim, it's now magnified to 10. So a lot of multiplying of the kalim, a lot of making things much bigger. At the same time, we know in the ancient Near East, the ways that kings really kind of established themselves for like their legacy was through major building projects. So I gave you this picture of, especially actually in Egypt, this was done. So like one of these temples in Egypt, the picture at the back, right, juxtaposed to the Beit HaMikdash. So again, and I think that Shlomo really was building the Beit HaMikdash for God. And we see in source 14, really just a beautiful, beautiful tefillah that Shlomo davens, where he says that this should be a place that people should come from all over to pray, to call on God's name, right? Ki yishme'una et shimcha gadol. Everyone's going to come. L'man yudu kol amei haaretz et shmecha liyiratcha kamecha Yisrael v'adat ki shimcha nikra habayit hazeh asher baniti. It's a very religious, very powerful religious moment for Shlomo. At the same time, I think, though, we can also see how, at the same time, is this also a building project for his name, right? Is this also that he's trying to create his legacy? Rav Yitzchak Halevi has an article on this also. He teaches at Yeshivat Har Etzion, and he talks also about just the location of the palace. Is the palace built near the Beit HaMikdash because Shlomo wants to kind of be involved in its Kedusha? Or is it because he wants to have a little bit of kind of control, that almost, to kind of gain more legitimacy from this being close to the Beit HaMikdash? So again, kind of, and again, I think a lot of this is understandable for a king who's trying to establish his legacy, but at what point did things start to break away? And just in source 15 also, there's a very famous Gemara in Shabbat that talks about when Shlomo wanted to come in to the Beit HaMikdash, right, almost the Sha'arim wouldn't let him, because they thought that, asking me who's the Melech HaKavod, who's the Melech HaKavod? Like, Shlomo, it's not you, right? It's Hashem. And almost a sense of hubris or a sense of kind of power and excess is almost starting to rival as Shlomo will think of himself as God. But I think also we see that kind of over here. So I want to move on because I'm a little nervous about time. We'll just cover taxation and we'll have a chance to kind of wrap up. So a lot of taxation going on. Look at sources 16, 17, 18. We have a lot of kind of different levels of taxation that are happening. Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun from Yishar Tzion kind of puts it together, and he actually comes up with an order. It goes a little bit different than the order of Sukkim, but the way he explains it is that at first, you have to start with Parak Tet, which is source 16. At first, we see that basically Shlomo has to put a mas, he has to put a tax on the people, because he needs to build the Beit HaMikdash, and he needs manpower for that. But we're told very specifically in Pasuk Chaf-Bet, in source 16, that even though Shlomo creates this kind of mas oved, he creates this kind of slave force of people who are going to build the Beit HaMikdash. At this point, it's not Jews. It's only kind of like the non-Jewish, not that, I don't know if that makes it any better or worse, but it's not the Jews that he's taking the non-Jews at that time to be the slave force to build the Beit HaMikdash. And that's kind of Shlav Aleph. That's like the first stage. Later on, Shlomo needs to kind of continue building up different things in Yerushalayim, and he kind of expands. He's going to be building up a lot of garrison cities of Gezer and Megiddo and Chatzor. Then in source 17, he now needs Jews. So Vayal Melech Shlomo Mas Mikol Yisrael Vehi Mas Shloshim Elef Ish. But now they basically get time off. So they basically go in shifts to work up in Lebanon, and they do 1 month of work and 2 months at home. But then finally in source 18, when Shlomo is doing even more building projects, specifically ones in Yerushalayim for Bat Paro, filling up the Milo, which is basically this area. It's a little unclear exactly what it was, but this area between the palace and the Beit HaMikdash. And now we're told that he put someone on top of Sevel Beit Yosef, which seems to be a Jewish slave force, specifically coming from Shevet Yosef, or the Shvatim of Yosef, which, as we know, were sometimes in conflict here with Yehuda. So kind of, not maybe picking a political rival to put into slavery. But again, there seems to be this breakdown that ultimately we're going to see leads to almost like an all-out rebellion when it comes to this taxation. And we see kind of, again, how Shlomo kind of uses, again, he needs people to be building the Beit HaMikdash, right? But again, what is happening here with the slave force as people start to feel, is the Beit HaMikdash being built kind of on the backs of the people? I remember discussing this with some of my students last year when I was learning this, and it was bothering me a lot. So some ideas my students had I thought were very interesting was, maybe for the Beit HaMikdash, it's okay to, we want people to be involved in the work of the Beit HaMikdash. So maybe we need to kind of motivate people in different ways. But then, it does hit a certain point where we feel that Shlomo is, asking too much. And he's kind of, the people have had enough, but Shlomo is just continuing to tax the people and to ask them to be involved in these building projects. And especially when it gets to, as we see in source 19, when Bat Paro is the one who's going up, and Shlomo wants to expand her house. But Az Banat HaMilo, and that's when Shlomo is building the Milo. That's when you turn the page over, when there really seems to be kind of an all-out kind of breakdown. And we see later on with Yerovam. Yerovam is one of the people who ends up kind of breaking away in the kingdom. But he's the person, or actually, I'm sorry, if you go back to source 18, Yerovam is the person who originally is put in charge of the forced labor of the Sevel Beit Yosef. And it seems almost like he's the one who ends up sparking this rebellion and he actually has to run away to Egypt. He only comes back after Shlomo has passed away because the people have had enough. And almost the tax collectors are like, we're not going to do this to the people anymore. And there's almost this kind of, rebellion happening against the taxation. It's interesting also, if you think about it, it uses the words arei miskanot, this idea of Shlomo, having this slave force. What does it seem to remind us of?
What is Mitzrayim?
Pardon? I heard lots of things at once, but
Mitzrayim.
right, Paro Mitzrayim, right, and even the arei miskanot, and a lot of scholars bring this up also. I just gave you guys a few examples, right? The idea that he's building arei miskanot later on, right, when Rechavam, when Shlomo's son is in charge, and he doesn't know what to do, and he ends up, taking kind of bad advice, and he tells the people, my father flogged you with this, now I'm going to flog you even more. So, his father was flogging people, but again, kind of this Mitzrayim imagery that's going on. Even the role of Bat Paro, right? Bat Paro in Sefer Shmot is the one who kind of brings the redemption, right? She stops slavery. But here, Bat Paro is the one who is almost, by her, position, causing slavery. So again, I think seeing Shlomo parallel to Paro is very, very shocking, right? I think it's also kind of a criticism that we see that's happening. To kind of bring this all together and wrap it up, I wanted to kind of share that on one hand, I think that it's important to also see the positive things that Shlomo does. Yerushalayim is an international center. Sources 21 and 22 talk about how everyone is sitting, safely. Ish tachat gafno v'tachat teinato, right? Everyone's sitting under their fig tree, which is imagery that's used in the book of Micha as that of almost Yemot HaMashiach, right? It's almost a messianic time. And I think it's important to kind of see the positive, the story of Malkat Shva, when she comes to visit and she's able to say, wow, look at all you've accomplished, look at all the tzedek u'mishpat that's happening, right, which is happening over here. That's really kind of the high point. I remember discussing this with Rabbi Menachem Liebtag, who came to give a mishmar my note last year, and he said he believes very strongly that everything's kind of good and then things go bad over here. He believes like Malkat Shva, that's like the highlight, right? When Malkat Shva comes and she's able to say, tzedek u'mishpat, this is the ideal of Shlomo's kingdom. As Machloket with Rabbi Alex Israel, right, who's saying, no, maybe it's a little bit earlier, maybe already here, we see things are kind of falling apart. Either way, I think the real question over here goes back to our original thing that we discussed. On one hand, if you want to have a state that's creating an Or Lagoyim, that's going to have people come to it, that's going to have people respect it, it has to have a certain amount of prestige. But the real question here is, how do we make sure this prestige is actually substantial? And basically, just to wrap up, just to share a couple of final conclusions. Really, we spoke a lot about everything that we saw so far with Shlomo, the different kind of seeds that kind of happened earlier, that, definitely a lot of positive things, but I think we saw things broke down.
The first session is ending right now. The first session is ending, and the second session will begin at 11:20. Thank you.
So just wrap it up in 1 minute. So I think that on one hand, we can see how this is something that Dr. Micha Goodman brings up, that even though there were definitely great things that Shlomo accomplished, you need to have that prestige, you need to have that power. You have to make sure that there's substance behind it. I remember reading about the Olympics this year and how there were a lot of kind of controversy. They were building all these stadiums, but who's building it, right? There are people, being abused and human rights being abused to, build certain stadiums. Like, that's a problem. And how do we make sure that there's substance behind our affluence? I think that's one point. There really has to be this test of affluence that Shlomo has, and how are you going to balance this affluence and power? The other idea, we'll just to finish, is that on one hand, I think that we really see when it comes to sin and when it comes to being reflective about our behavior and about how things work, that it's not always all or nothing. I think that the Navi, or the narrator who's writing Sefer Melachim, sometimes wants to give us a theological message, that when you rebel against God, bad things happen. So I think he writes it in a very kind of direct way. Perek Gimel good, Perek Yud Aleph bad. But I think once we look into it a little bit more and we see the nuance, we can see that it wasn't all or nothing, but different things build up. The Gemara talks about when you do a sin a few times, by the third time, it's almost like you have a mitzvah to do it, right? And I think that, especially as we go through this time period of Hashbon and Nefesh, of being very reflective, we can see there were very good things Shlomo did, but even the greatest kings, when they're not careful, things can slowly chip away at the resolve, and you don't even realize, how did I get to this place? And I think, obviously, hopefully in a much lesser way, in our own lives, when we think about things, when we take a real cheshbon nefesh, to really think about what, it's not just the big things. Nothing happens in a vacuum. What were all the small things that kind of led up to it? So a lot to discuss. Thank you so much for learning together today. I wish you have a and enjoy learning.
Thanks.